The agenda is for this meeting is we'll start with that question, what is Industry 4.0 and what technologies does it cover, what industries does it affect, and I'll also be demonstrating few related concepts as well as technologies that are involved, and then we'll finally conclude with what industry has to gain from this new technology, emerging technology, Industry 4.0.
GK, we can't hear anything. Is it just silence or?
Okay, sorry.
Any problem?
Okay, so the Industry 4.0 is the fourth revolution in the industry, manufacturing industry, and it's a $156 billion worth by 2024, as per the market research, a CAGR of 16.9% from 2019 to 2024. That means it's a huge opportunity for anybody who is looking into business opportunities or startups or even technological research, because there are so many new challenges that need to be addressed, and I'm going to cover some of them here.
So that's 156 billion. Is it total, or do you know per year how much would be the market?
That, as you can see here in the graph there, it's the source is there, industry market global forecast 2024. That is the report where it shows all those details. We are more focused on technology here, but overall you get the idea. That is $156 billion. That is the total of the industry market by 2024. The individual numbers could be gathered from that source, which is mentioned on that one. Now, Industry 4.0, when it's a, to understand the fourth revolution, we need to start understanding from the first revolution. It started about 1760, around that period, where the mechanization and the steam power, the invention of steam power, helped automate some of these manual work. One of the first industries that was subjected to this was the textile industry. In this period, the core important point that need to be identified is that the machine power was augmented with the human power. They were able to do more than what a single person can do. And it influenced the iron, agriculture, and mining industries heavily. After around about 100 years, the Industrial Revolution 2.0, the second industrial revolution came, which is a milestone, so to speak. Whatever we see today in terms of assembly line or mass production techniques, they have the roots in this industrial revolution. It was a major revolution, especially the one that defined the role of human beings, where a person need to be specifically trained and specifically specialized in one particular segment of the work rather than end-to-end skill. This revolution caused a surge in unemployment as workers were replaced by machines in the factories. And this is the beginning, because after about 100 years, we have a third industrial revolution which introduced the programmable controllers into the process automation. This completely made human power redundant in certain aspects. For For example, CNC machines and robotic arms, etc. They were programmed and humans are not needed anymore. Contrast it with the first revolution where you are augmenting your machines with the humans. And now by the time the third revolution came, humans have become redundant. Now after about 50 years, half century, we are in the period of industrial fourth revolution. What does it offer that is something significantly different than the previous revolutions? The core key points and key drivers for this industry 4.0 revolution is interconnectivity. For example, we all know human beings how they connect. For example, we use mobiles and communication networks, postal services, etc. Human to human connectivity is very well known. But what about machine to human connectivity? And more importantly, machine to machine connectivity. And then there is this concept of decentralized architectures we're going to cover briefly in the coming slides. The machine to machine connectivity is going to redefine the whole paradigm of how machines work and cooperate together. So this interconnectivity is a new paradigm that did not exist earlier. In the earlier periods, a machine is a black box. You don't know what is happening inside the machine. A machine could be getting towards a breakdown. It could be breaking down at any point of time and you didn't know. This interconnectivity combined with the data and insights, for example, real-time insights into what is happening inside, the transparency about the machine and the capability of the machine and the status of the machine, that defines a new paradigm. I'm going to demonstrate a little bit about condition-based maintenance, etc. But overall, this is something that redefined the utilization, asset utilization of the machinery. And then the third one is design, time helping, and diagnostic assistance. We all know CAD, CAM, etc. in the manufacturing industry where the computers assist them. What about assisting the human beings in production also? For example, in the manufacturing unit, directly manufacturing, being able to manufacture a unit at the prototype level and then reiterate it in a different versions. And another important factor is that self-diagnostic aspect of a machine. A machine should be able to help you analyze itself what is going wrong inside the machine and then clear-cut steps. Follow this step 1, step 2, step 3 to repair me. The machine should be saying that kind of thing. Like, I have this problem. Now you replace this, for example, anybody who has worked on printers, inkjet or any of those printers, laser printers, you will come to see there are some nice steps where they say there is a paper stuck here, open this step 1, step 2, step 3, follow these steps and then you will be able to clear that jam. That kind of steps, but at a much more higher level, those capabilities, which brings much more higher transparency into the machinery. And finally, the autonomous machinery. This is something that did not exist earlier, and this is a capability that all machines are about to acquire. We are talking about task planning. For example, till now, when we interact with a machine, we say how to do something like this is the step 1, step 2, step 3. You follow these steps so that I can achieve, as a human being, I can achieve the goal. But the future the technologies that we are creating and the technologies that we are working on, they create a scenario where the task planning, it's all about stating what do you want, and then the machine will formulate its own action plan. And then being able to make critical decisions at certain period of some time without having to rely on a human being. And more importantly, coordinating among the machines. For example, 2 or 3 machines or maybe hundreds of machines or small drones, etc. Coordinating together to achieve a higher task. These are the clearly separating entities. These are the clear markers that distinguishes this revolution from the earlier revolutions. So to start with, let's get into the first one, like interconnectivity. As I said, we all know human to human connections. And then there is this machine-to-machine connectivity, etc. So what are the technologies that are involved in this kind of machine-to-machine connectivity? We have these a plethora of technologies. Everyone must be aware of these technologies emerged in the past couple of decades, and we are actively using some of those technologies right now in the industry under various, especially from the software perspective, various software and products are being built as well as hardware. For example, IoT, M2M, and wearables, for example, Fitbit, etc. And then when it comes to prototyping, etc., the 3D printing and the material itself, the nanocomposites that makes it possible to 3D print any solids. And we all know how big data and predictive analytics as a combination that revolutionizes the industry in terms of gaining insights into the behaviors of the customers or the behaviors of the machines or the future, like how many orders are we expecting to receive in any certain industry, etc. And not to mention the augmented reality, virtual reality, some of these demonstrations are already going on in the industry. And the other technologies like sensors, sensing polymers and spectroscopy, data science, most importantly stream analytics and CEP. These are the areas that are going to have heavy influence in the market, like stream analytics. It is still nascent. People are still researching on these, and somewhere there are very few commercial or open source technologies here. There is a huge market opportunity here for complex event processing engines. We are going to go into some of these details in the coming slides, but overall, these are the technologies that if you want to get into Industry 4.0 or gain some business opportunities, this is where these are the things that you need to master in your business, like blockchain, cryptocurrencies, robotics, swarm intelligence, and once again, AI, ML, computer vision, GIS, renewable energy sources, etc. So let us start with the first one, a machine to human connectivity. How does a machine inform about itself to a human? As I said earlier, every machine is a black box. Now we are trying to get more information about the machine into humans, either to get administrative suggestions or to make business planning easy or to plan, for example, for fault tolerance or failures, etc. The core concepts here fall into two areas. One is sensors. Every machine or asset is attached with some sensors that gain data about the status of the machine and relay that information to the people, the stakeholders. So the first part is the sensors. The sensors could be like analog sensors or digital sensors. Digital sensors are gaining more rapid adoption in the industry, but till now we have these analog sensors that gather data about it. So what kind of sensors? What do you mean by sensors? For example, there are many sensors which we already use in the smartphones and as well as many of our machines and IoT, etc. Things like proximity sensors. For example, when two items get in contact, for example, a door, whether door is closed properly or not, whether it is shut down properly or not, or a brake, whether brake contacted properly or not, and then vibration sensors. These sensors identify the frequency of the vibration of a asset or machine. And if anything goes beyond certain limit, these vibration sensors give an alert, or they keep monitoring the vibrations frequency with which it is vibrating. And then airflow sensors, like in industrial gas flow applications, what kind of flow rate it is coming in, and then what kind of constituents it has, like as well as pressure sensors in a pressure tank, in a liquid tank or gas tank, how much pressure is being built up over a period of time, whether it is within the safe limits or not. And if not, what kind of preventive actions it should be taken, etc., etc. Fluid sensors, for example, in your vehicle oil transmission oil or your engine oil, any contaminations inside the engine oil, the fluid monitoring for exhaust, diesel, etc. So there are so many sensors, and then anybody who is working in IoT, they must be using all these sensors and many combination of these sensors to create a unique applications. For example, to automatically switch on or switch off one particular piece of equipment, etc. So this is the first part, sensor part. Once these sensors gather the data, it is transmitted to other entities. These could be human beings or machines. We'll come to the second part later, but essentially the data need to be transferred or shared with other entities. How does it do that? There are two main ways currently, like wired and wireless over a, for example, in the wired segment, we have industrial connectivity, things like BACnet or CAN bus. For example, a building area control network. A building that is equipped with sensors, it has a BACnet that gathers the data inside all the building floors and tries to monitor the what is happening inside it. And then CAN bus is heavily used in the automotive industry, where vehicles are equipped with OBD, etc. sensors, and then they gather the data and share it across different components over the CAN bus. These particular technologies like CAN bus, BACnet, etc., they are heavily suited for high number of I/O connections at low latency. These are not suited for things like, for example, file transfer, etc. They are not. What these are good at is, for example, get a reading over thousands of sensors within, let us say, 20 milliseconds. And they need to keep doing it continuously in real time so that it can keep recording all these hundreds and thousands of sensor data that is coming in. So these are good at that. And then the other segment we have in the wired segment is wired networks is the Ethernet we all use heavily. For example, server client architectures, web servers, and then FTP servers. These are very good at high bandwidth transfers. These are like, for example, broadband segment where the whole data can be transferred reliably, right? These are not specifically trained for low latency operations, but these are specifically designed to take care of high bandwidth and high bandwidth operations. But the problem with these is these are heavily oriented towards server-centric operations, server client operations. These are not designed for peer-to-peer. That is the decentralization of networks. And then in the wireless segment, we have multiple options here. For example, to start with, the most simple things are like NFC, near field communications, and then RFID, active passive tags, etc. And then we also have operator control like mobile, like 3G, LTE, 5G. In the narrowband segment, we have Sigfox, etc., which have proprietary protocols. And then the ones that we use heavily are like Wi-Fi. We all use Wi-Fi. It is designed specifically for a high data rate transfers, and it operates in a LAN kind of systematic mode. And the other one is like Bluetooth Low Energy. This is specifically designed for device-to-device communications to consume very low energy. The data rates are at around 1 M. That is suitable enough for multimedia communications between 2 points, device to device. It is specifically designed for device to device. And then the other one popular is Zigbee. This is specifically suited for IoT inside a home, etc., where you could create a private LAN of all these devices. But the problem with this is it has nominally low data rates, around 250 kbps, but the range is decent enough to cover a home. While these are broadband wireless segment, there is also narrowband wireless segment where the technology, things like LoRaWAN, LPWAN, which has a range of 10 to 15 kilometers, and it can create a wide area network. But due to the low frequency waves, the data rate transmission is limited to around 50 kbps and even less than that. This is well suited for automating a factory, like you have a large factory around 10 square kilometers area. You could be collecting data from different sensors and then um, having a private WAN for you. And then there are many protocols at the application level, for example, AMQP and MQTT. This is specifically designed for IoT communications, and OPC UA. that is unified communications across different architectures, etc. So the whole point is that there are numerous protocols as well as numerous ways of interacting with all these machine data. It provides both opportunity as well as a challenge. Because opportunity because you can solve the problem in so many ways. Challenge because you need to know what is the right fit for you. Do you need to go for a narrowband signals, or do you need to go for a broadband signals but consume high energy, etc., etc. So that covers the part where sensors data is collected from machines and the data is transferred through various mechanisms. We have so many opportunities there in terms of wired and wireless connections. What about the machine-to-machine connectivity? Specifically, when we're talking about machine-to-machine interconnectivity, where there may not be a human being involved, we have different areas of focus here. When we say machine-to-machine connectivity, it covers telemetry, telematics, pattern recognition, predictive analytics, and M2M. As a core, M2M, the core area of M2M is about connectivity, point-to-point connectivity. For example, an asset. Asset means a machine. Asset or a machine that you control on a building, connecting to another point in a different building nearby, a point-to-point direct connection, or point-to-multi-point. An asset on your building is talking to nearby assets on different buildings, etc. The core technologies that are related to these kind of M2M or telemetry or pattern recognition, etc., that are about to emerge in the coming days are like this. For example, when we're talking about point to multi-point, a machine in your building talking to nearby machines in nearby buildings, or a vehicle that is traveling on the road talking to nearby vehicles to share the data or to share the news or updates. For example, a vehicle might inform the other vehicles about an emergency or a roadblock. Right? How can that be solved? How can those kind of problems be solved? That is where mesh networks, etc., come into picture. Mesh networks are they abstract away the server client architecture towards a more peer-to-peer architecture, decentralization, where machines directly connect to each other and share data and information. And the other emerging technology that is already being used in some of these, like Cloudflare, etc., is edge computing, where in a server client architecture, the data is transferred to the server, and server makes some decisions, and then server returns back certain insights or actions. In edge computing, the reliance on server is reduced. Most of the decision making is offloaded to nearby the source itself. For example, where the data is captured, the decisions are made right then and there, or nearby in the nearby segment, rather than going to a centralized server. This once again contributes to the decentralization. And stream processing of sensor data. For example, telemetry. When we say telemetry, we're talking about being able to measure remote data. For example, weather sensing, remote sensing, and satellite imagery. So it's a one way, right? There is a sensor, and then you read the data from somewhere else. So this is the data is being read, and then the data could be read in and analyzed for certain patterns. For example, how is the trend happening, whether it is going up or down, or the median is moving towards certain limits, etc. That is part of the pattern recognition, where we could be analyzing the data in real time or historical. For example, when we say analyzing the data in real time, that is where stream processing comes into picture. For example, you could be making queries like, what is the median of the data you have seen in the last 5 minutes or last 10 minutes, etc. Real-time queries, real-time trend analysis. Or it could be historical data also. For example, you could be gathering data for 1 month, and then you could be giving the data for analysis. So the historical data, when we say historical analysis, what we mean to say is that the data is captured, and then there is a lag between the capturing of the data and then analysis of the data. So there is some gap. The stream processing, the technology addresses the real-time nature of the stream, streamed queries, and being able to identify trends. A closely matched technology for it is complex event processing. For example, events from different sources combined together and then create certain equations. Like for example, if this condition happens, if the door is open and if the AC is also open, try to do something, either shut down the door or shut down the AC, because you are unnecessarily wasting. So I'm just giving a very simple scenario, but complex event processing can handle hundreds and thousands of events like that in combination with stream processing. When the data is coming in real time, you identify the trends in it, and then you make certain decisions by observing the trend in real time. So the stream processing and complex event processing, those technologies, they form a very powerful combination. And once again, there are more opportunities here for anybody to do research or to create software products here. So the pattern recognition, the area, it analyzes the trends. And the predictive analytics, it tries to use those trends to predict the future. So identify the trends of the past and then try to project it for the future. For example, based on my last year's sales, how many sales I am about to expect in the coming year, or what could be my inventory stock that I should be keeping based on my trends in the last month. This is where the time series databases come into heavy use. We all know RDBMS and we all know NoSQL, etc., that is being heavily used in the industry right now. One area that is about to emerge as a mainstream is time series databases. The time series databases, whenever there is whenever there is a data that involves any component of time, these are specifically suited for analysis on top of those time data sets. For example, queries like give me last 5 minutes or last 1 month. When we say now is a variable, right? For example, now, the definition of now, the actual value of now keeps changing with the moment. I could say give me the data for now minus 5 minutes or now minus 1 year. So it gives me all the data for the past 1 year or past 3 months. And then you apply in combination with complex event processing. For example, in the last year, the same quarter, did the sales go up or down? Because there could be seasonality. For example, in summer, last summer, it's not the whole year, only certain quarter. Right? In the last summer or winter, how did my sales go? And do an analysis with respect to that, and then compare it, and then do certain events or certain tasks. So the combination of stream processing, complex event processing, as well as time series databases, it's very powerful with respect to businesses that are trying to get into real-time data analytics, as well as almost all businesses. Wherever there is a time stamp in the data you see, you could benefit from time series databases. And then after analyzing the past trends and identifying the future trends, you need to make certain decisions. For example, in a simple scenario, it could be like you open a gate or you open a valve. For example, the, the pressure is high. It is reaching critical limits, just like how it reached a certain time back where it broke down, right? So based upon my past scenario, if it is reaching up to those breaking levels, it is about to reach the breaking levels, then I need to make a decision. I need to make the valve shut or open, etc., based upon the exact scenario. So telematics is all about it's all about it's you can consider it as a converse of telemetry. Telemetry is about reading the data from a faraway sensor, and telematics is about giving back the commands to the remote machines. The question here is how do you guarantee the safety? For example, who is allowed to shut down the valve? If anybody and everybody can control, that is a that's a very difficult situation. We don't want to go into that kind of situation. And how do you, when you are analyzing the trends, how do you validate the accuracy of the data. For example, you are retrieving the data in real time and doing some analysis on top of it. How do you know that data is accurate? How do you guarantee that the data is not tampered? Because remember, when you are predicting the data based on past trends, if somebody gives wrong data about the history or about the past trends, then you will end up making wrong decisions. That could be a very bad scenario for your business. So how do you prevent it? That is where the blockchain comes into picture. So overall, these technologies play a key important role in the coming days, and they lead to the creation of smart machinery, smart factories, smart homes, or overall smart cities based upon your area of application. If you apply it in a factory, a smart factory. Yeah, if you apply it IoT in a home, essentially smart home. You do it at this city level, smart cities. Overall, it's like smart things. Essentially, you are creating smart things thanks to all these technologies that existed plus that are about to exist in the future. So what are the business challenges and open opportunities here? For example, things like high bandwidth communications at high speeds. Imagine a scenario where a vehicle is traveling at high speed, like a high speed bullet train or a flight. How do you provide broadband internet to all the passengers inside a high speed train? What are the challenges there? What are the technical challenges and what are the limitations? This is still open area. If you want to do some research, this is a field ripe for inventions. Similarly, in narrowband segment, for example, video surveillance in narrowband. For example, how do you capture video data from 15 kilometers far away, like a drone? You have a drone patrolling your whole city. Your city, let us say 30 square kilometer city or 20 square kilometers. You need to gather the data in real time for doing some analysis, or in general you want to store the data what is happening at that long range in a narrow band. For example, LoRaWAN, it may not be suitable for this kind of high definition data. Or when there is no broadband or no internet connectivity or no cellular connectivity, remote areas, how do you provide telehealth? So these are the areas that have high requirement for new innovations. And then we talked about analyzing the trends. When the data is huge, you all know that big data, etc., it takes care of this. But then a server-based processing is very difficult. So edge computing, how do you actually offload the decisions to edge? Which kind of decisions you should offload and which kind of decisions should go back to the server, etc. So edge computing, and then parallelizing all these into a large scale. Quantum computing, this is a kind of area that could improve the performance of all these what we are talking about, but still it is in nascent stages. The ground theory itself need to be established. So if anybody is working in these kind of areas, that's a very huge topic. Quantum computing itself is a huge topic. Maybe we should have a separate discussion for that specifically, because we have a lot to cover in this presentation itself. So we'll try to skim over it. And the other things like, as I said, how do you ensure the validity of the data and validity of who is operating and who is controlling the machinery, right? So that is where cyber security and blockchain comes into picture. Once again, each and every one of these technologies is huge. It's not, I mean, nobody can go full depth into any of these technologies in a single presentation. So if anybody is interested in going in deep into any of these technologies, we could certainly arrange for more discussions later on. But for now, in this presentation, we'll try to see how all these technologies come together. For example, here all these technologies playing nicely to um, form one machine-to-machine interconnectivity. After doing all this stuff, what is the use? This is the use cases. And these use cases are not restricted to one area. These use cases are span over multiple sectors, whether you name it automotive, retail, finance, supply chain, energy, healthcare, education. So many, for example, starting from predictive maintenance or condition-based maintenance or tracking your vehicles in real time or auctioning for buyer's basket or a connected cabinet in a retail industry or telemedicine, just we were discussing, in a remote areas or personalized medicine or monitoring a smart grid or remote monitoring of oil pipelines in remote areas where there are nobody. Especially these oil pipelines, they need to be monitored continuously because it's very risk as well as it's very costly affair if any oil pipeline breaks down. And then the whole supply chain industry is going to be revamped thanks to this machine-to-machine connectivity. And there are some very important Industry 4.0 contributions that create new opportunities, things like make to order and connected manufacturing a possibility. We are going to see one specific case here, which is like predictive maintenance. Let us say condition-based maintenance. When we're talking about condition-based maintenance, so let us say there is a vehicle and you need to identify whether that vehicle is fit for journey for the next 1 year or next 3 years, next 1 month, 3 months. How do you know whether your vehicle is when it is going to break down? For example, on a train, there are OTMR which gathers all this data from 300 plus sensors, things like the speed, the traction control, and then whether a door is closed or not, whether brakes are skipping or not, etc., etc. So in a typical vehicle, for example, it's now mandatory by the regulations that every vehicle that is manufactured in this current after I think 2006, every vehicle is equipped with OBD sensors, onboard diagnostic sensors. You could right now you could go into your vehicle and connect your OBD sensor to your laptop or even you with your phone and then start monitoring the data. But how can you use that system and enhance it to predict when the machine is going to break down? So overall, a condition-based maintenance, that is, we call it as condition-based maintenance, where we predict the failure of a machine based on the condition of the machine. The machine could be a vehicle or it could be anything. It could be an asset or it could be even a human being. We'll come to that in a moment. But overall, we gather the data about the machine, the status of the machine through sensors and then monitor it for real-time anomalies. For example, whether a certain trend is happening or not, whether like temperature is within the limits or not, whether the way speed is within the limits or not, whether the RPM is within the limits or not, etc., etc. We monitor it in real time and see if anything is going wrong. For example, if let us say temperature is going out of control or pressure in a valve is going out of control, we immediately raise an alert to a centralized control center where people will be monitoring and then they will be taking a corrective action. On the other hand, there is also the scenario of uh, in combination with real-time monitoring, we also have what is known as the expert system. Expert system is a software system that, as we were discussing, that creates a series of trends based upon the past historical data. And then it analyzes the current data that is coming in real time in combination with the past historical trends. For example, a temperature might not be crossing a certain limit right now, but it could be a trend happening over a period of time. For example, in the last 5 minutes, a trend was happening where continuously the temperature was raising. It did not reach the limit yet, but it may reach within, let us say, next 1 hour. Right? We want to identify the trend and then contrast it with the last time. For example, when last time when it happened, did it go beyond a certain limit or not? And what kind of situation happened there? And what is the failure rate of that, etc., and how it affects the overall system, and then make a decision and raise early failure signals to the control center. And then the control center could be also equipped with certain automated decision making capabilities. For example, if the pressure is going beyond certain limit, do this. For example, shut down a valve or open a valve, etc. So this is overall system of a condition-based maintenance. I'm going to demonstrate in a few minutes how this operates. But in general, as I said, the system or the machine that is being observed could be anything that generates some data. For example, it could be a human being. You must be aware of devices like Fitbit that gather the data, body vitals, and then they identify the trends. I'm not sure if they identify the trends, but in general, you could identify the trends and then gather the data to make certain decisions about your condition of your health, and then raise immediate alerts to the caretakers, right? So when we are talking about condition-based maintenance, it does not necessarily mean a vehicle. It could be a human being also. It, it is just that the domain is slightly different and the data that need to be captured is different, but the overall sensors and the operations and then overall expert systems, etc., they could be tweaked and trained for these kind of operations. So let us have a brief demo of condition-based maintenance where I'll try to demonstrate how the process of gathering the data and identifying anomalies, and then see how to predict the failures, etc. Overall, this kind of condition-based maintenance in general is useful for predicting remaining useful life of an asset. For example, what is the remaining useful life of my vehicle? How long I could use this vehicle before it breaks down? Let us say I know based on the data that the vehicle is about to break down in, let us say, 3 months. Then I could plan a predictive maintenance. I could plan a maintenance schedule so that I could take it to the proper maintenance people and then get it revitalized or repaired, etc. When I know when I'm going to make a maintenance, then I could plan proper inventory of spare parts also. This is very important in businesses where economic order quantities are important. For example, when you buy in bulk, um, you will get certain benefits. And more importantly, you don't want to maintain unnecessary spare parts. And at the same time, you don't want to maintain spare parts that are important and required at a lower level than the required required quantity. And it also allows you to properly plan your workforce schedules, how many people are required on particular day, and if a breakdown is scheduled, if a maintenance is predictive maintenance scheduled because of a breakdown, you could change your workforce schedules, and also most importantly, inspection routines. And for example, in oil pipeline, usually in a manufacturing plant, etc., you send human beings to inspect the machinery or plants. The question is, what is the right interval for inspection? Should you be inspecting the plant or machinery or asset every month or every year or every hour? For example, every month, let us say you inspect it every month, but it could be too late, right? If the machine breaks down with in between, then it could be too late. You may not have that opportunity to find out the problem beforehand. But then if you inspect it too frequently, like every hour, then you are unnecessarily wasting your manual power. So these kind of technologies help you optimize your inspection routines. And what if alternate scenarios? For example, for every task or for every work, there is always a possibility of getting it done with two kinds of, or three kinds, or multiple kinds of assets. Let us say a vehicle has a tire or a brake or a wheel. You could replace the wheel with multiple vendors. For example, Seat, Apollo tires, or MRF tires. Which one is more suited for your particular purpose? And then designing things for like warranty periods and comparing different designs, etc., etc. So let me demonstrate the condition-based maintenance aspect, how we do it in the software. I'm going to demonstrate with some simulated sensors here. For example, I'm starting some sensor simulators, which actually in a real world scenario, all this data comes from different IoT sensors, but here I'm simulating from them on my machine here. And then I'm going to start a dashboard that is represented. For example, here we have 4 sensors that is sending data at different frequencies. Each is a different data point, right? Like for example, temperature, RPM, velocity, etc. And then we have this, let us say, a dashboard that represents, that gathers this data in a centralized control center and then analyze the trends over it. For example, here you could here check this data is coming from this temperature. Whenever it is changing, the data is captured over the network and it is represented in the sensors. Whenever it is going beyond certain limits, it records it as an anomaly, and here it is visually indicating it. It also indicates it through emails, SMS alerts, as well as some notifications to the administrative personnel. And overall trends are recorded here, and in real time, the data is streamlined. Right now, the data could be streamed not only to your machine, but it could also be streamed over a network. For example, I am sending this data to, let us say, a cloud. For this, I have started the cloud connector, and I am also starting now a web server that will give me the, let us say, a cloud capability. Right now, I'm demonstrating it. I'm going to access the same data, network data, over a web page. And this web page could be hosted on any of your cloud machinery. And sorry. So this is the data that is being captured on a website. The data is coming in real time. This is the same data that is coming from that one. And we could compare, for example, these two here side by side. And the data is same as being received on the centralized dashboard administrator. And here you could see the warnings that are being recorded. Whenever there is a critical warning or error happening, the data, hope the page is refreshing properly on this WebEx. But in general, you should be able to see all these warnings, etc., in real time as they propagate. And then the notifications could be sent to the administrators. So this is the data capturing part. Typically, we do this with the different technologies here. In this small connectivity part itself, there are so many technologies that are involved. And then what I'm going to do right now is demonstrate a condition-based maintenance, how it here. What I'm demonstrating is, let us say, a brake failure. Consider a electric locomotive and electric train, and it has so many components. one of the components is a brake, let us say, and our goal is to predict when the brake is about to fail. Now, when we say a machine failing or a vehicle or asset failing, it does not necessarily mean the whole machine is failing. Some components of the machine fail. The goal is to identify which component is failing and then do proper maintenance for that particular piece before it fails. So here we're talking about doing prediction for failure for a brake. What I have here on the lower left hand side here is a control to help me vary the operating conditions. For example, this locomotive could be operating under different conditions of temperature, different load weight, and then sliding velocity. Sliding velocity means when you apply the brake, how fast the brake is skipping. And then brake application rate, how many times the brake is being applied per minute, and how long you are applying the brake, etc. And then there are some conditions that do not change. For example, things like the brake type. There are multiple brake types like drum brake, pad disc, slotted annular disc, and annulus disc, etc. Each type has uh, its own properties, its own characteristics of the failure. And then there are other characteristics like disc type for a brake. For example, the disc type could be carbon-carbon or asbestos or resin, etc. And then each brake has a certain wear coefficients and disc thickness and disc area. These component designs are fixed. When they manufacture, they fix these components. They do not change. But then some properties change. For example, operating conditions. When your vehicle is going on a different terrain, like let's say a mountain terrain or a very cold ice frozen terrain, versus a heavy damp terrain like nearby river area or flooded areas, etc. These operating conditions change over time. Nobody can predict them. So what we have here is a controller that simulates these kind of operating conditions. And then on the right hand side, you see a schematic diagram of a locomotive air brake. Essentially, it's a very simple schematic diagram that indicates a triple valve that opens and closes based on the brake position. When the valve is open or closed based upon the valve's condition, the brake is being applied here in the bottom section. And then when the brake is applied, the temperature increases, and then the brake pad may deteriorate, the material may deteriorate and then break down, the brake may fail. On the right hand top section, you will see MTTF, the mean time to failure, and MLife. The MTTF indicates the mean time to failure in terms of number of years. For example, right now under these conditions, the MTTF is 2.15 years. That is for uh, the mean time for next failure is about, let us say, 2.15 years. And then there are these critical warnings, etc. If the mean time to failure goes certain beyond levels, the application will have these alarm lists. And then what if scenario, we'll come to that. So let us say I change the operating conditions. For example, let us say I increase the temperature and then I increase the load weight. As I increase the load weight and then I increase the application rate, that is number of times I am applying the brake. As I increase the application rate, you could see the failure rate here on indicated with yellow as well as MTTF on the right hand side top. It goes down because the brake application rate is influencing the prediction rate. All these calculations are actual engineering calculations. Whatever you are seeing here are engineered calculations. They have very well mathematical theories behind them. So what you are seeing is a real-time simulation of a brake failure under certain conditions. You could use these kind of simulations. You could use these kind of calculations. We use these kind of calculations to identify which component is about to fail if your vehicle operates under these conditions. In this case, the brake, it could be other components failing. So when you have to assess the whole failure rate of a vehicle, then you have to combine all these failure rates of your tires, your brakes, and then your engine valves and all the other components, and then finally come up with your safety ranking for your vehicle. So as my brake application rate goes down, my failure rate will also come down. So this is a real-time prediction value. And then most important is the capability to do what-if analysis. For example, when you are replacing your vehicle tire, let us say tire, you have multiple options. For example, you could go with MRF tires or Apollo tires or CEAT tires, etc. But which tire is useful for you, you don't know unless you know what your usage is going to be, and then you have complete idea and understanding of the design. You may not know. But if we, with this kind of what if analysis, what I'm doing here is that on the screen you see here, there are multiple calculations done for different combinations of brake types. For example, I have this drum brake here in the first row and slotted annular disc in the second row and pad disc on the third row, where the failure rate, FR here is failure rate. Failure rate per million hours is calculated for all these combinations of, for example, on the top row, you see each column is a disc type, whether it is metallic lining or carbon lining, etc. And each row is a brake type. So on the left hand side here, component design, we have multiple factors here like binder resin, wear coefficient, etc. But here we are taking, for this demonstration, we are taking two factors and then identifying what if alternate scenarios. For example, if I increase the sliding velocity, you could see these calculations change. And overall, um, out of all these combinations, the one with the good combination is something that you want to pick up for your operating conditions. For example, in this case, let us say I reduce it to normal levels of temperature, etc., and then load weight I. Here you could see that this particular carbon-carbon lining with slotted annular disc, it has 2 years of mean time to failure, whereas others are like 2.4, 2.5. For example, this one carbon-carbon with pad disc. So if your machine is operating under these conditions, which, by the way, these operating conditions you could gather them from your sensors, right? So as your sensors gather these operating conditions, you could calculate these in real time and also do this what if analysis of, for example, if you are right now using this, let us say, sintered metallic lining with slotted annular disc, right now you are expecting a mean time to failure of 1.9. Instead, if you had gone with this combination of pad disc with carbon-carbon lining, you could have gone under these same conditions 2.5 years of mean time to failure. Right? So this is the kind of analysis that could be done um, in real time or your historical data as you gather the data from your sensors, which is very helpful. And here we are just doing the what if analysis for column one, I mean 2 dimensional, like column and row. But we have here in the component design, we have here 4 or 5 segments: binder resin, wear coefficient. If you add all of them into multi-dimensional, that is where big data comes into picture, where you need to kind of do this calculation on multiple dimensions to derive what is the most optimal design for your operating conditions. These operating conditions could be specific for your vehicle. So this is one of the applications of, let us say, a combination of all these technologies, the sensor data coming in picture, and then engineering calculations, doing the failure analysis, and then simulation, and then big data, etc., etc. All these collectively work to give you accurate predictions on what is useful for you as a person or personalized decisions. So that is the overall uh, theory about as well as practicals about this one. Um, till now we covered about the data connectivity and then using the data to kind of monitor it for anomalies in real time, plus making certain decisions in real time, as well as predicting the failures in, let us say, in real time, plus what if analysis possibilities. What if analysis, let me assert again, it is a very powerful combination, M2M with predictive analytics, especially the what if analysis. What if instead of choosing that, what if I have chosen this? The other way is, the other way to get that kind of insights is you buy both, right? Both vehicles, or a vehicle, equip them with both tires and run it, which is a very costly affair, right? So the technology is about to revolutionize many things. All these combination of technologies, all these nicely working together. What you have just now seen is many combination of technology. I could easily say about a dozen technologies combined together to form the demonstration I have given you just now. And one more thing is, like, for example, we were discussing about healthcare, right? So let me give that also. The concept is once again same. The data being captured in real time from different sensors and then monitoring. For example, whenever the body vitals um, they go beyond certain limits. For example, here this person is tracking their weight gain and loss. For example, they kept gaining the weight in June, July, August, September, etc. But in October, this person lost 1 kg weight. I don't know what he did, but if he is aiming to lose weight, then he should keep repeating it, right? But in November, he gained 7 kgs. He lost 1 kg, but immediately ate enough to gain 7 kgs. So whatever is happening. So this is the kind of analysis that gives you a trend of how things are progressing as a trend. For example, here we have, like, let us say, LDL and HDL cholesterol levels and your BMI, and you are tracking it. For example, over a period of years, like 2014, they were towards this high BMI and the systolic pressure and diastolic. This is BP. Over a period of time, 2018, 19, etc., they started to see this HDL and the BMI they and diastolic pressure, etc., they decreased, and the weight height ratio and then HDL they started to increase. So there is a trend that is happening here. By gathering this kind of information and let us say, for example, this is the sleep activity over a period of time, and then the past medication history, what kind of medication he was using, etc. So this is a combination of real-time data plus a past history to identify what all, for example, let us say reminders. What are the remaining? He's supposed to go to colon cancer screening in certain date. Influenza vaccine, it is due now, but he didn't go. He should be going right now. Pneumonia vaccine and control of cholesterol, etc., etc. And these are the list of problems he had earlier. For example, post-traumatic stress. He last visited this hospital at certain hospital in Portland, but then he didn't follow up. And then there is this whole case notes like diagnostic and then lab results. All this is captured and maintained in such a way that the decision support systems can make personalized recommendations for each person independently. So once again, I'm not going much deep here because we have other things to cover, but these are the areas of technologies. Once again, whatever I have shown just now, it uses multiple different technologies together to create that kind of scenario. So before we move on to design and diagnostic, etc., anybody has any questions till now? Okay. No problem. Okay, so yeah, if everybody is good, then I'm moving on to the next. So till now we have seen the connectivity part as well as the data insights part. If you remember, we were discussing about, for example, here, the four segments, four contributing factors of Industry 4.0. And we covered connectivity part and the data insights part, real-time insights, anomaly detection, failure prediction, etc. Now we will cover the design and how the Industry 4.0 design considerations takes place, and then autonomous machinery. Yeah, there is this question where somebody is asking the software that is demonstrated just now. It is all created proprietary. It's all created by me. The software by us, like um, as part of the demonstrations for various clients as well as case studies for different customers. So to answer your question, that software is like it's our software, our own software. So let us go to this, move on to the design and diagnostics, where we will be covering the prototyping, simulating, and then diagnostics section of the Industry 4.0. But before we understand this, we need to understand one important, very important concept known as the democratization of a technology. What does it mean, a democratization? Democratization essentially means um, an average person being able to access a technology, any given technology being accessible to equally to multiple people. I mean, overall population in general, without any restrictions. To understand this, you have to understand the concept of religion, because this is a very important concept. It ties together the technology evolution and the demands of technology and the progression and how societies operate and where the future is going to. Religion always played an important role in the growth of human evolution. And as you know, nothing unites people from various backgrounds better than religion does. Across continents, people are united under different religions. And at the heart of every religion is a concept of a book. Every religion, almost all religions, have a concept known as a book. It is what is central to them. You take any religion, there is certainly one book central to that religion. It could be one book or a series of multiple books, so to speak, but essentially the concept of a book is central to the concept of a religion. What does that book contain? Whatever is that central book, what does it contain? Typically, it contains things like guidelines, like what is right and what is wrong, what is considered as good, what is considered as bad, and history of events or history of people or life and death stories of people. or certain events that happened in certain periods of time. Now, this is a very important thing because the history in those days, let us say we talk about, let us say before 12th century, the literacy was very less. Number of people who could read are very less, and even less are the number of people who could write. So there were specifically trained people who are known as scribes who took care of writing anything and documenting anything that is given to them. For example, writing these religious books or documenting these events and historical, documenting the history. It is the responsibility of the kings through these scribes. So kings used to take this responsibility of documenting the events that are happening, and then they employ these scribes. Or certain religious monasteries, they take the responsibility of documenting events that are specifically relevant to them. This is important because when everyone follows the same book, it is easy to unite people. I did not say read. I did not say everyone reads the same. I said everyone follows the same book. There is a strong distinction there, and it is very important. I'm not going to go into deep because this is a sensitive subject, but overall, from in relation to our present discussion, you need to consider it is easy to administer large masses of people when everybody follows the same book. In general, the book could be a religious book, or right now we call it as a constitution, so to speak, in democracies. Right? It is easy to unite them when everybody follows the same book. But the question is, what happens when everybody starts to follow different books? And even worse, what happens when everybody can create their own book? This is the question that was unleashed by the printing press. In the around 1400s period, the printing press revolutionized the concept of mass creation of books, mass documentation of ideas and concepts, and sharing them publicly or in certain groups of people. This directly or indirectly led to scientific revolution that we see today. For example, scientific journals, scientific publications, they all are rooted in this concept. And printing press, it also created new labor structures. For example, a whole new industry, book industry came into existence, and then the concept of libraries, which was earlier the responsibility of certain authority, people like kings or monasteries who were maintaining these libraries specifically, now started coming into masses. Like in general public, people could go and access libraries, and it created new roles, new jobs like proofreaders, layout artists, editors, etc. Overall, printing press led to creation of new verticals like journalism, media that we see today. They are so powerful. Printing press played a vital role in shaping the history of the humankind. Its role in general could never be overstated in civil wars or revolutions. For example, to give a simple example, the first thing certain governments always used to do was banning certain books. Certain books with certain ideas were banned whenever there is a certain situation like a war or revolution. That is the role of printing press. If we are in this stage in the technology today, that is thanks to printing press. This printing press is one of the core pieces that contributed to the democratization of technology. It's actually a stellar example of democratization of technology. another similar piece is open source software, open source hardware. For example, if you are working in the IoT industry, or if you are a hobbyist who is working in IoT, you must have used boards like Arduino or Raspberry Pi or so many other things that are all thanks to the open source hardware. And artificial intelligence and machine learning, etc., we have been doing it for quite many years. For example, since 1950s, the artificial intelligence, the concept has emerged and many contributed to it. But in the recent years, it gained major traction in the wide community because thanks to the open source of majority of these libraries that are released. Open source played immense positive role in bringing the technology to the masses and most importantly to where it is in the industry today. Another thing that is similar to open source is internet. And when I say internet, I'm talking about non-technical part of the internet where, for example, anybody could, if anybody knows GeoCities from olden days where anybody could create their own blog, or platforms like YouTube, TikTok, WhatsApp, where anybody could have a freedom of expression. They could record their videos, ideas, or what they are doing and share it publicly with anybody they want to, or in general with public. It gave unprecedented freedom of expression. What printing press did earlier, similar thing internet did digitally. It brought freedom to masses, the communication freedom to masses. And it also created new business models, things like, for example, YouTubers, people who create videos on YouTube and gain money out of it. So this is a new business model that did not exist earlier. And then there is this crowdfunding was made possible through the internet, for example, like Kickstarter or Patreon, etc., etc. This is another piece. This is another piece that is heavily impacted the digitalization. Next in the series is, the problem is, if you, I, everybody could go and create our own books, our own software, if anybody can record their own video and start publishing it for wider audience for consumption, how do you validate the truth in it? For example, fake news. We all know in certain circles like WhatsApp or YouTube or in general on Twitter or Facebook, there is this problem of fake news. How do you identify what is right and what is wrong? I mean, what is valid and what is actually verifiable content? That is the problem with democratization. Democratization brings the technology to everybody, but at the same time, it does not really validate whether the person is authorized enough or if the person is qualified enough to use those technologies. In general, how do you fight this scenario? For example, that is where the decentralized consensus comes into picture, the blockchain, the technology of blockchain. For the democratization of technology to work correctly, it is very important that it should be decentralized and a consensus should be emerged through decentralized mechanism. That is what the blockchain takes care of. Similar to the printing press, open source, internet, and similar democratization of technologies areas, contributions. There is one new entry that is emerging in rapidly decentralizing and more importantly, democratizing the manufacturing industry. that is 3D printing. 3D printing is essentially a additive manufacturing mechanism where you add layers of solid and or you fuse deposition layer by layer or in certain chunks till you achieve your desired shape or output. Essentially, I would like to call 3D printing as the manufacturing for the masses. For example, to understand it better, consider this scenario. Earlier, we had mainframes and supercomputers. What smartphone did to supercomputer? 3D printing does the same to industrial manufacturing. It miniaturizes the production machine and makes it accessible to every common person. You and I can create, you and I can manufacture. So what does it contain? So what does it offer, 3D printing? It offers rapid prototyping. For example, you can do things like jewelry design or architecture models. You could quickly prototype. For example, mechanical parts. Let us say a vehicle, a car. You could model your seats or your steering wheel, etc., and quickly prototype it and verify the model. For example, aerodynamics of your body shape, your car, your vehicle body, aerodynamics of the vehicle body. You could study it with your 3D printing models. It offers rapid prototyping. Earlier, if you have to do this kind of thing, you have to create molds, or you have to create with a specific intent. A human being has to solder different varying parts, and then they have to do it. But with 3D printing, in a single session, you could get all the parts for yourself. Not only prototyping, we're talking about consumer products also. For example, drones. You could completely print a drone using 3D printing, the full parts, as well as automotive spare parts, for example, like valves, gears, nuts and bolts, etc. What are the advantages of 3D printing? It offers you quick production. Instead of taking days or weeks, you could typically produce it within hours. And it offers precise resolution. For example, just like a normal printing where you could print at a lower resolution or high resolution on a paper, you could do the same for 3D printing also. You can control the resolution and the accuracy. Accuracy is always high based on the model you choose. And most importantly, it's reliable and repeatable. Once you build something out of this model, you could share the model with others and they could do it too. They could generate that same model too, which was not possible earlier. If you set up a manufacturing industry here, unless you have the same manufacturing industry somewhere else, it is very difficult and it's very costly affair. The whole process of repeating it. The repeatability is a major selling point for 3D printing. But it is not good for bulk production. It's not good for mass production. It is not, unlike a typical factory where you could produce thousands of items in a single batch. 3D printing cannot do that, at least in the current stage. Rather, what it does well is personalized production. So essentially, 3D printing is suited for low volume, highly personalized production. But what kind of businesses need low volume and highly personalized production? Where do we need that? What else? Your home to start with. People like to have their own home specifically designed for them. It is a low volume business, but highly personalized. 3D printing, when you evolve it, we call it as 3D construction. You could construct bridges, houses, and architectural forms. And this is not just a concept. People have already done it. For example, in October 2017 in Russia, the first residential building with all permits approved was fully 3D printed and finished. And people are actually living there right now. It's not a prototype. It's a real utility component. People are really living there right now. And the speed of construction is one of the reasons why people like 3D construction. Typically, you are looking at, for example, being able to completely 3D print a building in a day. That is the speed with which 3D construction can boost the construction industry. And countries like China, Dubai, Netherlands right now are exploring this and creating new ways of improving all these construction mechanism. And not only on this planet Earth, we are talking about creating 3D construction on lunar base also. In 2013, European Space Agency, in collaboration with Fast partners, set up a lunar base printing project where the goal is to construct the complete environment required for habitation on lunar from the materials that is available on the moon itself. Which means the amount of material that need to be transferred from Earth to moon is drastically reduced. Theoretically, the expectation is that the plans they made is that only 10% of the material is required to be shipped from Earth to moon, and the remaining 90% of the material is directly gathered and utilized there itself on the lunar basing itself. And also, not only the habitation, other parts like landing pads and blast walls, roads, hangars, fuel storage, etc., are considered in the plan. It's a active and very interesting project that highlights the utilization, that highlights the importance of 3D printing, 3D construction specifically. There are few points that need to be identified here. We were talking about low volume, high personalization. What is the personalization here? The personalization here in this context, the lunar base, is not about the design, but rather it is about being able to use the specific material that is available in that particular context. So it is personalized for lunar, it is personalized for moon. Let us say you want to construct similar habitats in outer planets like Mars, Jupiter, or let us say Saturn. Then it will be personalized for those materials. So the personalization aspect here not only covers the design, but also covers the different aspects of the material and construction mechanism that is different for each planet. That is the most important criteria. And second important criteria is that the material that is required is directly gathered at the construction site, and the production is happening directly where the construction is supposed to take place. The material construction and the actual the consumption is happening in a single place. Imagine if Earth has to produce all this material in different factories and has to ship it to the moon. That is a humongous task. You are talking about humongous shipping of the material cost itself, plus the transportation cost in terms of the vehicle, the space of the vehicle, plus fuel, etc. But that is exactly what we are doing right now in the manufacturing segment. When you look at it, for example, manufacturing a typical shoes or clothes or any other like your cars, vehicles, different parts are manufactured in different points on Earth and then shipped to different locations on Earth for assembling and then consumption. For example, your car or your shoes are built in one place, manufactured in one place, and then they are shipped for consumption to different place. That is the exact reason why we have a complete halt of the global supply chain right now because of this corona and COVID-19, because it disrupted the global supply chain, and you do not have the regular production operations and supply chain operations going on right now because they are not constructed where they are consumed. 3D printing, 3D construction offers that. It's a very important step in the Industry 4.0. Being able to construct in different locations, right where the consumption happens. Coming back to the personalization, what is the other vertical where low volume business and high personalization is important? Biology, medicine. Personalized medicine, as I was indicating some time back, it's a area where the big data and analytics play important role. That's a separate discussion altogether. But in general, when you talk about biology, 3D printing merges the concept of engineering and biology to create personalized products, prosthetics, bionics, and orthotics for personalized fit and affordability. Things that require long time to manufacture. For example, prosthetics and implant, they require specific milling and expert forging and long delivery time. They could be modeled within hours using 3D printing. For example, what you see on the screen is a anatomical model created by Stratasys using polyjet mechanism. They are specifically useful for training purposes and most importantly for surgical planning, because every person is unique and every person's requirements are unique because of their biology. Patient specific surgical plannings help the doctors plan um, the operations more in a much more effective way. And more importantly, biological tissues 3D printed from scratch could contain, for example, biological cues that can be created for full function. Essentially, we're talking about tissue engineering. Instead of non-living prosthetics, we're talking about tissue engineering. This is another area where you have a lot of business opportunities, plus technological opportunities for innovation, plus research opportunities. Because the combination of engineering and biology is a huge, huge potential that is about to see vast growth in the coming days. So we have seen prototyping and how it affects and how the democratization of, let us say, printing press and then internet, etc., revolutionized the industry. And we also saw 3D printing, and we are talking about not just prototypes, we are talking about real construction, not only on Earth, but also across habitats. And these are real projects that people are actually working on. These are not just concepts, real projects people are working on, and you could contribute if you are interested. For example, self-replicating robots is a very important concept in automation of space. If you are interested, it's a very good publication from the days of 1980s by NASA. If you are interested in those kind of topics, you can read. You will find it very interesting, and you will find many research topics there for you to explore those concept of self-replication robots as well as self-printed habitats of lunar and extraterrestrial machinery. Moving on to the other concept in industrial revolution, the simulation. How does the simulation help? For example, we were talking about smart machinery, smart factories, and so let us focus slightly on smart cities. So let me ask a simple, silly question, so to speak. When we say smart city, are we talking about every person in the city being smart? So what exactly are we talking about when we say smart city? So rather than a smart city, how about we, for this discussion, we focus on, let us say, safe cities. A city is safe if every person and eventually every building and every property in it is safe. But how could you assess the safety of a city or for that matter, any building? That is what we are about to, I'm going to demonstrate. We are about to see that. It is called a structural safety. The structural safety, when we say, for example, there are buildings in a city where people gather in large numbers. For example, public meeting spaces or auditoriums or movie theaters, etc. How do you assess the safety ranking of a building? For example, if people gather in large numbers and if anything were to happen for the building, for example, um, building collapses or fire hazard happens or flood happens, how easy for the building, for the people to be evacuated in those scenarios? Let us say in a scenario where a building is a 10 floors, and then in the 10th floor some fire happens. How long does it take for the fire to propagate and spread to all the rest of the floors, and how long it will be before the last person can be evacuated? So these are some of the questions that could be answered by the structural safety simulations. And once again, we could do what if analysis, for example, if the fire happens in 10th floor versus fire happens in the, let us say, in the ground floor, how fast the fire spreads, etc., etc. So for now, let me demonstrate to you one simple simulation. So what you are seeing on the screen here is a model, 3D model of a building. As you can see, it has 2 floors, and it has certain number of exits in these highlighted locations. For example, 2 on the top floor and kind of 6 on the bottom floor. And then there are stairs here. And then there is a central shaft in the building for the lift. The central shaft here is the lift location. And let us say there is a burner here. It is, you could consider it as a fuel source. It could be a gas tank or it could be a fuel tank. So our goal is, if this gas tank or fuel tank in the ground floor explodes or burns, start to burn, how long it will be before the whole fire engulfs the whole building? How long it will take for the fire to propagate and completely occupy the whole building? This is where the fire dynamic simulation comes into picture. So we take this 3D model and run fire dynamic simulation on top of this model with respect to this fire starting point. And we also consider things like, for example, if there is any material that is hazardous, for example, um, wood or burning material like clothes, and then the number of windows, number of doors, and then airflow that is happening, etc. They all influence the fire propagation. So we take all these into consideration and simulate it using physical equations, heat simulating and heat propagate and fire propagation equations, and then come up with a model to observe and identify and predict how long it will be before and how the fire behaves. So I have done that simulation already because it takes a lot of time. For example, in my case, in this particular case, it took around 40 hours on this machine to completely render these calculations. This is once again where big data and all these high computational resources, for example, like quantum computing, they could help simulate all these scenarios in parallel. So what you are seeing on the screen here, once again, is the same model, but it is simulated to hope you are able to see the fire and smoke animation that is coming on the screen. Um, what you are seeing is when the fire starts on the bottom point here, it starts to propagate through different channels and windows and open spaces and propagates to different locations in the building. For example, um, let me So let us start in a slow step-by-step scenario. Here the fire started, and the time here is the actual real time in seconds, number of seconds. The bottom screen you may or may not be able to see it in the webinar, but here we have a bar here in the lower section, and there is a timing that corresponds to number of seconds that happened since the beginning of the simulation. So the fire started to emerge in the bottom section, and it is propagating the ground floor. And here you could see it is going up in the vertical shaft and starting to engulf the first floor. The smoke already started engulfing the first floor. It crept to the first floor, and fire started to emerge in the first floor. That is around 124 seconds. That is 2 minutes. Now, as we keep progressing, by this time, 150 seconds, whole corridor of the first floor is completely filled up with smoke. And then bottom floor, as you can see, the ground floor, it's already flooded with fire. And by the 160 seconds, fire started to emerge on the first floor. And as we keep progressing, 200 seconds, on the right hand side, completely, the corridor is completely filled with fire. On the right hand side, by 240 seconds, smoke and fire completely took over both the left section and right section on the top floor. 240 seconds, that is like 4 minutes. After some fire event happens in the ground floor, in this particular design for this particular building, you have 4 minutes for the people in the first floor to evacuate. That is by no means enough. 4 minutes is not enough for anything. Where did things go wrong? In this particular design, things go wrong because the central shaft here, which is supposed to be used for lift, that acted as a conduit for the air to flow freely and sucked in the bottom fire and made it propagate into the top floor. If you look at it, the bottom section, the ground floor left hand side is relatively fire free and smoke free compared with the top floor. That is because the central shaft acted as a conduit. On the right hand side, the fire is, you can see, it is very heavy. And you could also measure the temperatures, at what temperature each is. By 240 seconds, you could see the temperature is unbearable. No one will survive that kinds of temperatures. So this is one particular scenario where the fire started in the ground floor. What happens if the fire rather started in the first floor or right hand side, left hand side, etc.? Those are the other scenarios, what if scenarios. What if it started somewhere else? What if there are multiple at the same time? Right? What if there is no central shaft? What if the fire, the burning rate of the fire is less, etc., etc.? All these could be analyzed and studied. This is once again where big data and then quantum computing, etc., could help fuel the accelerate the speed of these calculations. By studying these and by understanding these safety hazard risks for any given building, um, the governments could mandate certain regulations. For example, whenever a building plan is proposed, they could be studied for all these kind of variation. And once again, fire is one simple example. The other scenarios could be flood and collapse of a building and other scenarios that they could think of. All these could be simulated. We have the technologies and we have the equations to simulate all these things and then identify the safety rankings for buildings. Right. So this is where the Industry 4.0 simulation and many technologies here come into picture. For example, the simulation, the 3D modeling, and then engineering calculations, and then big data, and then in future maybe quantum computing, etc., for parallelizing all these equations to identify one certain particular optimized model of this building, etc. All these are playing together nicely to solve our human beings' problems for the future of our society. And are there any questions before I move on to the last part of this presentation? All right. So moving on to the last part of the presentation, which is autonomous machinery. This is the last contribution, so to speak, from the Industry 4.0 for our current generation in terms of the technology evolution that clearly separates this revolution from the previous revolutions. When we say in autonomous machinery, we are talking about essentially things like driverless cars and then air taxis and commercial drones that you are already seeing many businesses working towards, and robots for use in factories, mines, and agriculture. One concept that all these use heavily is the usage of sensors and lidar, etc. And they rely heavily on computer vision. The challenges here in this technologies is that poor visibility conditions, for example, like darkness, fog, rain. Can these sensors operate well in those circumstances? These are the open challenges we still have. And this is ripe for research as well as business opportunities. How do you ensure pedestrian safety? So to address all these concerns, the driverless vehicles, let us say the bottom, the simplest lower common denominator, the driverless vehicles. We have the Society of Automotive Engineers have defined in the industry 6 levels of automation. Essentially, level 0 is where you don't have any automation in your vehicle. You, as a driver, you drive it. No automation, no support at all. And the level 1 is where there is some sort of support for cruise control and lane assist to keep your vehicle in the same lane, which reduces your driver fatigue. But you still have to have full control over the vehicle, and you still have to monitor the driving environment. You still have to apply the brakes, and it is your responsibility as a driver. And level 2 is almost similar, except there is much more, a little bit more control by the machine in terms of steering control, and then um, maintaining the same speed, and or with respect to any vehicles before you, reducing the speed to avoid collisions, etc. But still, you need to have hands on the wheel, and you still need to, as a human being, you still need to monitor the driving environment. The real automation starts from the level 3 onwards, where the automated system monitors the environment and the auto driving starts. The concept of auto driving starts under certain ideal conditions. For example, on highways and on one ways, on lanes where the speeds are clearly marked. So this is where automation and auto driving under certain ideal conditions happen. Um, you still need to have, you still need to be ready to take control of the vehicle whenever it is required. And because the machine may not be able to negotiate hard corners or overtaking or other scenarios. Currently, the industry is kind of creating these level 3 mode of transportation for now, and they are trying to go to level 4 automation, where vehicle is capable of driving under all circumstances. And human override is optional, but you can still take control of the vehicle if you want to, but it is optional. And usually this is geofenced, which means within your city, the vehicle can go from any place to any place, or within one certain block, it can go from any place to any place, because it has well-defined navigation and well-defined rules and regulations, and it can nicely take control of the vehicle. It may not be able to go outside terrain, for example, like outside certain terrains, and it may not be able to uh, go to unknown territories, etc. But certainly, this level of automation is uh, still useful for most of the commercial operations. For example, for everybody who is commuting to their office, business place every day, this could be very useful. And level 5 is like the holy grail, where machine can do anything. There is no human intervention really required. Theoretically, you don't even have a steering wheel there, and it's a scary situation. But maybe by the time, if the vehicles can, if they are smart enough to do things, maybe people will adapt to it. It is scary because there are many incidents reported recently in the last few years where driverless cars have caused accidents, and drivers were fatally injured, and even deaths were there. Um, that is the present scenario where we are in level 3, and level 4 where as businesses we are trying to target. As I said, this is a industry that is ripe for invention, and many challenges are there. And if you are interested, this is one good business prospect as well as a research prospect. These machines, these driverless vehicles, they rely heavily on sensors and rely heavily on sensing the environment, essentially computer vision processing algorithms, also known as machine vision. Machine vision. One interesting application of machine vision in a different area is agriculture and food processing. It is heavily used in agriculture and food processing, for example, to identify crop diseases, to inspect pest, to monitor pest and control it. For example, pesticide delivery through drones, and monitoring the yields, and identifying the weeds and removing them, etc., etc. These are already being used in the industry, and this is well-defined research area, and there are many applications there still, because agriculture is one important area we all should contribute heavily to. And for example, the factories are already using things like grading to identify the defects in the products, and sorting the products based on their weight and color, etc., into different groups. In fisheries, typically you identify the weight and health of your product, like which is fish, with contactless um, measurements, population estimation of certain species, and identifying the different species of birds in forestry, and population count, etc., etc. These are all machine vision applications that are both heavily used already and still have a lot of opportunity in the future to um, implement. Overall, what is the technology landscape here? The technology landscape, it uses many technologies to start with. On the left-hand side, you start with, let us say, 3D printing, composite materials, energy for self-sustenance of drones, etc. And then computer vision, as we just saw, navigation and object detection, collision avoidance, to create driverless vehicles. And then we were discussing about blockchain to ensure the transparency and validity of the data, auditability of the data, and auditability of the decisions made by entities. That is cryptography. And a major challenge in the research is in terms of collaborative planning, how different set of drones or different set of vehicles can collaborate with each other on the road. Collaborative planning. M2M telematics, we just discussed, and we saw how M2M connectivity and failure predictions, etc., they all interact with each other through different technologies like We discussed stream processing, CEP engines, big data analytics, and possibly quantum computing, etc. All these combine to give us in future the autonomous machinery. While the technology flow looks like from left to right, what I am more interested in here is the concept. Once you have the autonomous machinery, which means machinery that can plan the tasks, that can collaborate with each other, that can make decisions on its own. That machinery, when it goes back and starts using the 3D printing capability, that is where the real artificial intelligence starts. Right? So we already saw things about, I mean, maybe in movies, etc., where cybernetic organism trying to kill people. Well, I would say don't worry about some bugs coming and killing us. Look at where we are today. We're inside homes, hiding from some small virus. What is the size of virus with respect to our body? Terminator is a huge steel machine. Even before Terminator comes, we have enough things to kill us. So let's not worry about robots killing us right now. We have enough things to worry us to make us sit in our homes. So that's from my side with respect to Industry 4.0. In other words, what exactly is it giving for organizations? It is giving digital integration vertically and horizontally. And more importantly, it is giving new business models. For example, mini factories through 3D printing, distributed manufacturing. We just discussed about where the production can happen anywhere from anywhere where the consumption is. It need not to happen in a single location or central location. It could happen anywhere. And most importantly, product as a service. This is a new business model that is emerging, product as a service. Instead of selling the product directly, for example, like air compressor, companies are selling the product as a service. That means the air, that is amount of air that is generated, the compressed air that is used, they are selling that, which means they still own the um, air compressor, but people pay for the compressed air as well as, like for example, solar panels, etc. This is a new business model that is emerging. So what are the industries that are going to be affected? These are the industries: electronics, automotive, metal, engineering, construction, everything you can think of. How much digitization and how much influence they are going to have in each industry? 77% of the operations in electronics are about to be, in any electronic company, 77% of their operations will be digitized and integrated into Industry 4.0. In metals, people are expecting 62% of their operations to be industrialized into Industry 4.0. And there is also a corollary effect on other industries like fintech and edtech based on the, for example, like augmented reality and cryptocurrencies, etc. That is a direct correlation and contribution from Industry 4.0 evolutions. So to summarize, Industry 4.0 offers scalable distributed production through mini factories, producing things close to the consumer, and a decentralized assembly line, and new business models such as product as a service, and being able to make to order a batch of one, a personalized entities, being able to manufacture personalized entities and multiple parallel products at the same time, and new technology models such as autonomous machinery.